Okay,
And
okay.
we're recording.
All right. So this is topical, the first topical Tuesday, thorny personnel and thorny issues. Um, I cabbaged that from Patty, but I liked her email. These events, as they go on, I encourage a lot of participation. This isn't really meant to be strictly training from on high disseminated to whoever's interested. I really think if this is going to catch on and be really useful for everybody going forward, we really kind of need to make it participatory. Get that headset out, get it so that you can use it. I understand the thing about the camera, but if I can put my face on a camera, so can you. I think it's important that we share our interests and concerns on whatever topic we can think of, and by all means, turn in topics or say, I want to start a discussion on X. The goal here, the secondary goal, besides talking about what you want to know about on the topic, is to also get you all comfortable with Zoom, because it can be a great conversation tool.
Robin, can you hit record?
Okay.
It's recording. It is. Okay. It's been recording since we started talking.
Okay,
right, so that's too bad. Anyway, Zoom can be a really good conversation tool. You need a headset, a functional headset with a microphone, a camera, and that's not very much investment. If you need any help getting it set up in the future, talk to Dan and Greg. They'll help you get it set up. The more comfortable we can get, all of us get with this tool, the better conversation we can have. And one of the things to think about, for example, county meetings could be held on Zoom if you wanted to get all the libraries together in a county. If you had a certain subject that interested everybody, you could just get together and have a discussion. You would need to book the meeting through NEKLS, get in touch with Robin, she'll set it up, or any of us, and we get the meeting scheduled for you. But we promise not to come in just because we see there's a meeting unless we're invited. It's a tool for the library directors and staff to use, and I'd like to see us use it more and more. So that's sort of the origin of Topical Tuesday. Before I start, I wanted to say that we have as a project a policy library of NEKLS member library policies, and we haven't rolled it out yet. We hope to make them searchable PDFs, and so that if you have any questions about what other libraries in your area are doing, you can, not have to reinvent the wheel, and you can copy from the best. So it's in a sharing environment. I'm hoping that will help us all resolve issues. I thought today I would really quickly review personnel policy. And I wanted to start by saying policy is the what and the why. And that responsibility is the library board's. And the library board has the authority to change it at any time. And it is not something that's grandfathered. So if personnel policy at one point didn't have sick leave and didn't have vacation, and they decided to start giving sick leave and vacation, they'd revise the policy, make it official. If at some point they changed back, you just wouldn't have vacation and sick leave anymore. It's not, employees don't have grandfathered benefits or rights in the situation. Personnel policies are the ones that are probably used the most often every day in the library. And as a result, they really need to be reviewed at least every 3 years completely. More often if the situation warrants. I know some of the librarians, as they've come into new directors coming in, have found that there have been a lot of policies that are under the assumed category. Well, we always did it this way, but there's nothing you can find in writing. So I know a lot of our new librarians especially have been changing policies or finally actually getting them in print. The difference between the policy, which is the what and the why, and the procedure or the implementation is to think of procedure as the how, the where, and the when. So the board is setting the broad guidelines, and it's the library director that's going to develop the procedures to implement that personnel policy. Basically, the difference between just the personnel policy and an employee handbook is minimal. An employee handbook is the personnel policy of the library. I would say you really should have a preface that kind of discusses from the employee's point of view what you think they should get out of this material. And at the very end of it is where you put the at-will statement. Kansas is an at-will state, as you all know. There are no librarians unions anywhere in the state of Kansas, for public librarians anyway. And you really are serving at the pleasure. The director is serving at the pleasure of the board. The employees are serving at the pleasure of the director. And the policy needs to make that kind of statement pretty clear. Do you want me all to keep going just a little bit through this? Will you stop me, please, or chat, and Robin will give me the big breaks? Fine.
I'll interrupt her if you guys want to use the chat. Otherwise, you can unmute yourself and ask a question anytime.
Yes. You know, just say, ho, ho, I want a little more information, or we know that, let's move on. The other thing I would say is that the thing I don't see always on a personnel policy or an employee handbook, on the very cover, it should have the date revised and adopted, so that you know how old that policy is. By not dating it or putting it on the footer of every page, there's really been a lot of conversation about, well, we don't know when that was adopted, and we can't find that sort of information. So those are the general sorts of pieces of information to think about. When you write the policy, remember it's what and why. You can create procedure, but that's the how, where, and when. And you feel free to talk to NEKLS staff, send them a sample. Here's what I've come up with so far for the board to talk about. Do I have the distinction between policy and procedure in place? And we'd be glad to help. This whole presentation, if it works, oops, didn't work. I clicked too much. All right, this whole presentation doesn't have a handout that you're going to come up with. This is some, and I should stress, some of my favorite Dilbert, for the most part, statements about personnel and HR, because he's really got this covered pretty well. I'm going to give you a second to read that. It's actually happened in a library I can think of, where somebody just very nicely sent them an email about their behavior. Didn't go over well, felt like it did for this, in this situation. Does anybody have any questions about the right of the board to change policy? Are you all comfortable with that? If it's a major change in direction, it's sort of awkward and it can cause a lot of employee issues, but and the discussion is going to have to be had with what's changed. Does anybody have any questions or issues, concerns about that? That means all sorts of things. Definitions of work weeks, holidays, vacation, all of that. I kind of divide the policies, and you can organize this in any way you see fit. I usually think of it as starting with general employment policies. Those are the statements that you make that are the equal opportunity policy, nepotism. Some places ban nepotism, and a lot of the smaller and rural libraries, if you couldn't have relatives, you might not have as many employees as you'd like. A lot of organizations have a review policy that the board has to approve a relational hire. And I think that's probably a good step to have some understanding there. Of course, you've got the Americans with Disability Act and equal employment. The citizenship or work permit, I suppose, is something that's going to get even more critical as the immigration arguments go on and on and on. But you're always supposed to have that sort of information on an I-9 form as part of a hire. I think it's really, really important to have two kinds of statements about conduct. Ethics and confidentiality statements, and then also standards of conduct. Because in this particular instance, for example, it's not that people don't misbehave, it was how the correction happened. You know, dear pointy-haired boss should not have just forwarded that email to Ted. Obviously, but it's all in perspective. You know, discussing the expectations that you have for the work environment can be detailed in procedure, but there really should be an expectation of behavior and standards of conduct that exist in the policy itself. You have the harassment, you know, the non-harassment statements, verbal harassment, sexual harassment, tobacco, alcohol and drug statements, guns. What is your policy on guns? And of course, then that's limited by what the state ends up doing to you, and that may be a reason you have to change your policy. These general employment policies. Yes? Say that again. Okay.
I think that was Kim, and her audio is having issues, so maybe she'll chat what was going on, but it looked like she unmuted herself. Galen did make a comment, how it is done is at least as important as what is done earlier. So. Well,
yeah, procedure is very important, but you have to have something to hang a procedure on, and that is what board policy is for. They go together very well, but the policy doesn't need to be bogged down as much with the procedure itself. I started to say this is also what I consider a general employee policy is an inclement weather policy, because from an employee standpoint, do they get paid for the whole day if you send them home early? All those questions you have that if it's not spelled out somewhere, you don't have anything to hang your hat on. And it can get kind of concerning. So I would I would have an inclement weather policy that spells out what your expectations are there. As you get into actually the employee themselves, you're starting with the hiring process. Some of that can be in your personnel policy as well. And I love this one. Reminds me, my family always says, yeah, you talk about the cannibals and the pygmies and, you know, the fox and the chickens and getting them across the river. You can have policy statements about accurate job descriptions. You can have policy statements about advertising. That does your board require that you advertise a position? Is it sufficient to do in-house advertising? A lot of those things can avoid problems down the road if you think these things through. Kansas is at will. So even if you have a training period, it isn't a contract obligation. You can terminate somebody in a training period. You're not obligated to go all the way through a set time, even if you have in procedure or policy that there will be a training period. And you will do a performance review. You will follow all sorts of steps like that need to be done, but if you don't find it's working out, you're not required to wait 90 days. I've had people that were terminated in less time than that. I have people that were really good to work with until they thought they were safe. They got past the training period and you ended up having to terminate them because there were more things that you needed to have done and they weren't up to doing it. So just remember, as long as you document what you do, even if you have a policy of a 90-day training period or a 6-month training period, if it's not working out, they can leave sooner. Oh, wait, wrong way. I can't even run the slide. This is bad. So this is my very favorite one. We actually had an interview one time that, you know, when we interview here at NEKLS, we tend to have us versus the interview candidate just to terrorize them, I guess. It was en masse. And we had one person interviewing for a tech job that really came in holey jeans with holey tennis shoes and kind of a little bit of a swagger and sits down. And he's telling us that, telling us about his last job, and he said he was a whistleblower at KU Med on their transplant program, and they terminated him, and he was suing them. And I looked over, and Patty has her red pin out, and she's drawing little red flags all over this person's page of information she was writing on, which I think of every time I see this Dilbert cartoon. People will tell you the most amazing things during an interview. It's really incumbent on you to kind of maybe change the conversation quickly. It's hard to stop somebody sometimes. You'll find that what people say and how they say it gets to be a really, really important thing. The whole point goes back to this sort of thing. Do read that resume. Do the due diligence and check the references. Do check. And some positions you really need to do a total background check if they're working with children. How many of you do a background check now on anybody? Can you raise your hand? And Robin, can you tell me if anybody does?
Certainly. If you look on the participants window next to your name, there should be a raise your hand button.
Yeah, and I can't see it, can I?
I can't see it because I'm logged in as the,
Yeah.
nobody's raising their hand yet.
Okay. Well, I really do think in some places background check if they work with children is not a bad idea. You can do some simple things like you can look at the sex offender website and a few other places, but a good background check for some situations is not a bad idea. If you're going to have them in a situation where they're using their personal vehicle to do anything for the library, or they were to use a library vehicle if you had one, you really need to do a driving check, because that can be a big problem. There was a library in our system that had someone with a really bad driving record delivering books to nursing homes in the area, and they had an accident. And then, the library had issues, and it went away. It was okay, but they really shouldn't have had that person out doing library business in their personal vehicle. And had they done a vehicle check, it would have helped an awful lot. Like I said, this is all Dilbert. There you go. We're going to move into, I'll let you look at that one while we segue into the important thing in a policy as far as work schedule and pay plan are concerned. You need to define the types of employees that you will have. Full-time is often 40 hours a week. You could define full-time as 36, whatever works for your organization. Often the reason you have those classifications is because a certain level of employees are going to be entitled to a certain type of benefit. So you need to define the tiers that are the types of employees that you have. You need to set a work week schedule that's beneficial to the organization. It is not required to be Sunday through Saturday. You're open on the weekends, and here at NEKLS, we had tech people that needed to work on the weekends. They weren't exempt staff. So our work week here goes from Saturday midnight Friday to Friday at 11:59. So it's, Saturday through Friday, because people working on the weekend, in order to get them into the required number of hours, they had the rest of the week to adjust. With the new classification information that's come down from the feds, with classification changing and the salary base changing for your hourly people, it's really, really important that if you have people that work outside of your regular office hours, that they know they are to turn in their time. And that should be stated clearly in policy. That we have here people that answer and express questions or technical support questions on the weekends when the office is not open, and that they are expected to keep track of those hours, and then they have the rest of the week to adjust that sort of information. So make your work week work for you. It does not have to be Sunday through Saturday. Most people think that, or Monday through Sunday. If it's easier to start on the weekend, that's perfectly legal and it's allowed. As far as pay, you don't need to link pay individual salaries for employees to budget. You should have a aggregate dollar amount. You can anticipate where you think you'll be paying people in the next year and round up so you have a little bit of room. But when you are in an employee policy, you don't need to have, we're going to give this many cents raise at this point and this much here. I've seen policies that are very, very detailed. You just need a general policy statement that says the library director recommends all offices, departments, and positions to the library board, normally as a part of the budget process. In other words, they're talking aggregate here, not individuals. So that you're not doing in June and July, well, we're going to give Joe a 10-cent raise starting in January. That's not the time to have that discussion. Those raises, the board sets the big budget, the library director determines how much the raises should be within that structure. I know that's not true in all cases. I know in some cases the board approves every individual salary. I'm going to tell you what best practice is or what the ideal is, and then you'll have to know where you are and try to work slowly. A best practice situation. I keep telling you that this should never be done because it isn't going to fly with you. You're going to have to work through it as an educational process. Again, if NEKLS can help in any way as you work through some of these issues, we'd be glad to do that. Regular part-time. That's normally defined as 1,000 or more hours a week. That's a baseline for capers. That's a baseline for a lot of insurance plans that offer part-time employee insurance that requires a minimum. Timesheets.
Yeah, Kim heard the same thing I did. Can you repeat the number of hours per week, full part-time?
Well, it's 1,000 hours a year.
A year, okay.
1,000 hours in a year. Did I say week? Oh my God. I just feel like I work that much. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Thank you.
Sorry. 1,000 hours a year, or an average of 20 hours a week. 20 hours a week is usually considered regular full-time, full part-time, regular part-time. Capers is going to tell you to plan on 20 hours a week, but actually where the Capers threshold is 1,000 hours in a year. So when you have part-time employees, if they're not working 20 hours a week, and you're classifying them as regular part-time, you need to track hours, and you may have to limit someone or they become Capers eligible, and that's not a good thing. Most of you are paid hourly. You can have salaried hourly people, and the way you figure that is to simply take 2,080 times the hourly rate and divide by whatever number of pay periods you have. Policy is going to say that you're paid semi-monthly, monthly, bi-weekly. They might set the frequency of payroll, but they aren't going to talk about the delivery of payroll. Unless they want to say in policy that they would require direct deposit or a credit card, for people that didn't have a bank account, a card that they could load. As far as compensation, compensatory time off, that's one of those reasons you would restructure your work week so that as much as possible, the adjustments for working overtime happen within the week. It's not always possible, and I know we all track it, and we should give compensation then at time and a half off at another period of time that we're going to show it's them, we're going to pay for it, in other words, at another point in time. How the mechanics of timesheets work is actually a procedure, and if you need any information or help on that, we'd be glad to work on that with you. Holiday pay is really not required. It depends on how your policy is written. For example, I love Catbird. If you look at what they're talking about here, you can work your hours as much as you like, as long as they're from 8 to 5. Flex time is not bad as long as everyone clearly understands what is flex. So not every organization, and very seldom in libraries, is it where you can set your own hours. You're driven as a customer organization. Your hours of opening are when you need staff. So you're not going to have as much flex time unless it's your IT people, and then you may want them working a little more flexible schedule. Understand what you need and design around it. It's supposed to work for your organization. You are, of course, required to pay minimum wage, and it's not $15 an hour, although it might be in some places in Kansas City if it gets around to it. The thing to remember is you have to be aware of what the federal regulations are, because as a government entity, you are required to follow the Fair Labor Standards Act. So that's where the 40 hours a week comes from. Other organizations, other industries don't have to follow the standard. If you are a farmer and you're paying farm help, they don't get overtime. They get straight time. There are certain ag-related industries that can work 44 hours a week straight time, and then overtime doesn't kick in until after that. It depends on the federal Department of Labor standards and your state standards. But as a government entity, that's why you follow the federal standard. That federal standard actually does not discuss break time. Break times are not required by law, either at the state level or the federal level. That's an optional internal policy, and really doesn't work with the same type of customer service issues that you have on an hourly shift. You just cover for each other. Lunch hour. You have to be really careful when you have people that are taking a lunch break at work. If you allow them to sit at the circ desk or sit at their desk as they catalog while they eat lunch, and you're passing phone calls on and they're doing work product, you're going to fall into a trap that could be very, very painful for you at some point later on, because that's called suffer or allow to work. So as the director, if I let somebody sit at the circ desk and eat and don't give them a lunch break, they have 3 to 5 years to come back and say, I've kept track and I had to work this many lunches, and they will take it to wage an hour and make a claim. And very likely your library will have to pay up. And that also has happened to 2 libraries in our system in the last 20 years. So take very seriously if someone is at lunch that they are allowed lunch time, and you don't expect them to work or cover. And if they have to, you need to pay for that hour of time. it's cheaper to do it in the beginning than it is to do it later on. Of course, most of you all know, like military, returning to work after medical illness, returning to work after military duty, you do have to save their place. If they can't come back and do the same job they did before, and there is really no accommodation that will get the work product you have to have done, you can terminate them, but you better have a lot of documentation about what you've attempted to accommodate and where you've gone with that. Yeah.
Laura, Galen has a question about if we're paying the person during the lunch break time period, it's covered, right?
Right. It's just, for people that work an 8-hour day that's 8 to 5 and they take an hour for lunch, if they have that hour, it needs to be their hour for lunch, and you can't expect them to work during it, or you need to pay them. There are libraries that, you were the only person there, and so if they were only wanting you to pay for 8 hours, you could certainly legally turn around and ask for that 9th hour. And there are people that have done that. As far as benefits go, health insurance is offered by some of you and not by others. If you're going to offer health insurance, there are lots of options you have, but make sure you have a very clear statement about who is eligible and how much the employer will pay. And that is part of a policy statement. And that's one of those things that you'll end up changing things for. Personnel policy doesn't really need to address whether you have an employee benefit fund where you levy for the benefit. That's really not part of personnel policy. That's how they're paid for. So you have health insurance, vision insurance, dental insurance. Some libraries have none of those but offer short-term disability insurance. Okay. All right. Short-term disability insurance is something that's not very expensive, but it's a nice item to provide to your employees. The thing is, why do you even want any benefits beyond Social Security and Medicare taken out of your paycheck? The whole point of employee benefits is to improve employee retention. You spend a lot of time and effort and money hiring people and training people. It's nice to be able to keep the people that you want to keep employed happy to work there, and it's really not a let them eat cake sort of situation. You need to work here and break rocks. Benefits are important to people, even if it's something as simple as one personal day a year. If you can't offer vacation and sick leave, surely you could afford to pay one personal day a year. Other kinds of benefits, some of which are required and not, that the library must fund. Workers' compensation. The library is required to have workers' compensation if the payroll of the library is over $10,000 a year. So your library must have workers' compensation. You would get that from an insurance person. We use State Farm here, but talk to an independent insurance agent and get the best rate you can. Unemployment, Kansas unemployment, libraries with over 20,000 in payroll, they must pay Kansas unemployment. and you need to get signed up for that. It's not expensive. I will tell you, as some of our libraries have found out, you really want to pay your unemployment and Kansas Employment Security Tax, or the unemployment tax. You really want to pay that on time, because if you're late on a quarter or two, by the third quarter, they're threatening to have the sheriff come padlock your building. I don't know, those people have absolutely no sense of humor. The Department of Revenue isn't nearly as rude as the unemployment people. So pay your stuff quarterly and pay it on time is my recommendation there. And that's not a policy, that's procedure.
Amy from Effingham says, if you're late, they're going to come get you. I know this.
She does. She's, Amy, I think, would agree. She's managed to find every warning letter that could be delivered by several different revenue types of organizations. Some of her treasurers have caused some issues for the library. Right now, they don't have any though. Other types of benefits that need to be discussed, or if they're going to be provided, are retirement types of benefits. You could have a 457 plan for your employees. You can have one that only has employee participation. You can have one that has both employee and employer participation. Those kinds of benefits wouldn't cost the organization much, but there again, you're looking at things that help employee retention. CAPERS is getting to be quite significant over time, but it's a great retirement provision if your organization has it. If you currently don't have CAPERS, I would guess that it's not something your organization can provide on an economically feasible basis. What they're going to do is come in and do an age study and decide what the rate of insurance, the employer side of the CAPERS participation should be. You could have currently, it's 10% of what the employee makes, almost 10% by the time you take the two different kinds of components of the CAPERS employer side. I know some people, when they did that actuarial study back when the CAPERS employer rate was 4%, they actually were paying 15 and 16% because that organization joined CAPERS with older employees closer to retirement. And so the actuarial study said, oh, well, your rate's going to have to be higher to recover rates. So CAPERS is usually not something that I think is economically feasible for most libraries at this point in time, but you can always call and check. But if you're doing the payroll, if your library does the payroll, it has to be the library that joined CAPERS. Gayla and Overbrook found that out the hard way because many years ago, the librarian was on CAPERS through the city. They were doing their own payroll, and CAPERS came in and said, no, you have to pay your payroll. You have to pay your CAPERS through the entity that does your payroll. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to call us at the office. We'd love to help. Holidays. Holidays should be listed in policy. If you have the ones that you're going to pay staff for, you really aren't required. It's just not good practice, especially if you have part-time people and they're regularly scheduled to work on that day and it's a holiday. Some places do pay, some places don't. You can clarify that in policy, but I would think part of the discussion might be is how much is it going to cost the organization over time, and is that a small benefit your part-time staff could have? It's a discussion. It isn't anything hard and fast. However, there is nothing, if your library is open on Christmas Eve, your library is open on Christmas Eve. If your library, as far as the federal government is concerned, there is no holiday that an employee cannot work. It's a question of what hours of operation your organization is going to have. You know, it's really, really important to know that you could have to work on Christmas Day, and there's no legal reason that you wouldn't, other than there is in the library and they come to open on Christmas Day. But there are plenty of other places, and grocery stores included, where they do work, and that's why they can. Holidays, from an employer standpoint, there are some years that you pay more in holiday benefits than others. When you do planning for budget, it's a good idea to look ahead and see when the holidays fall. You aren't required to say that if a holiday falls on a Saturday, you get Friday off. If it falls on a Sunday, you get Monday off. You're not required to do that. In fact, when I had my own business, those were employer holidays because we didn't have to pay for Christmas Day. It was on the weekend. In a small business, that's kind of where that's going to happen. But there again, you might look at that as a board. The consideration should be, how much will this cost us every 6 years? And is that employee benefit worth it from a board perspective? Lots of leave has there are lots of different kinds of leave. And as we got into new directors coming on, one of the things that they found out that libraries don't do at all hardly is maternity leave or paternity leave. I don't know very many libraries that do that. That's a possible benefit that could be there. You are required to have leave for jury duty. It's a good idea to define leave without pay. You definitely need family and medical leave policy statement. Other things that I think are important to have are injury leave and bereavement leave. And then there's always the category of leave without pay. Did anybody have any questions on vacation and sick leave in the current group?
Diana just asked, well, she said she has a request for leave without pay for a grandma.
Right.
So I'm guessing bereavement.
Well, or
becoming a new grandma.
Yeah. You certainly can grant that. If they're willing to take leave without pay, in actual fact, you really have very little leverage short of saying, I'm sorry, you have to cover that day, and if you can't work, I'm going to have to terminate you. I mean, if they're willing to go with leave without pay, you aren't causing a problem. Oh, thanks. I'm glad you didn't. I opened
And then Kim Priest's got a question right above that. How long is too long for an injury?
Well, I think it varies. You have to really have the doctor's statements. You have to have a clear understanding of what the progression is back to work. And at some point, and in libraries, you just don't have that much leeway. It's a financial burden for the organization. If it gets to the point where you actually have to hire somebody else to have enough time. there again, the key is documenting. You need to document this process because very likely it's not going to be something that that person is necessarily happy about. But the hard thing is to separate your concern for the individual and the responsibility you have to the organization.
Yeah, she said currently they're switching other employees around to cover, but the injured employee isn't getting paid either. So
yeah, that can really only go on so long. I think that's that part of that frank conversation and having good information from that they've given you from the medical doctor, authorizing the doctor to talk to you as well. So I can't really say a time frame. It's just documented every incremental step in contact. And it may be that you actually have to replace them and say, when you are well enough to come back to work, feel free to apply. We'll try to make, but you can't make any promises there either. There's all sorts of different kinds of emergency leave and professional meetings. You really need to have in a personnel policy a statement about continuing education. What you will and won't pay for. Some policies even go so far as to say that for employees, they'll cover continuing education lodging on a shared basis. You have to split. You can't have a hotel room or lodging for one person. They'll only pay for two people in a room. So they'll only fund half the bill. And some of people say that directly in their policies. I have blabbed for almost an hour. Does anyone have any questions? Like I said, this time I was only going to cover really kind of the setup of the whole thing. What the policies are, how you hire someone. Now on a procedure, I didn't say, on a procedural level, when you hire somebody, they are filling out a W-4, a KW-4, an I-9 form, and they should, as a new hire, as a government entity, fill out the loyalty oath or affirmation that we sent out at the last Directors Institute. It's a one-time thing. It all goes in their personnel file. Other things that you're going to have to know to do for a new hire for health insurance, you need to give them the statement that says you either do or don't provide.
Laura, is that oath on the NEKLS site? Do we have that up there?
Mike, do we have that up there? We have it on a blog, I think. I think he did a blog post, maybe. It needs to be up there.
Maybe on the new member page?
Yeah.
Okay.
Write myself a note. The best thing I can tell you is if you're going to get into looking at personnel policies, and we don't have the policy library up yet, give us a call and we'll tell you who to get in touch with, or we'll send you copies of other libraries' policies at similar size and situation. Because the nicest thing you can do is develop a policy from the best parts of each other. Carol, that's why they have an oath or an affirmation. An affirmation has no religious component. It just simply says under perjury, but I am making a true declaration. Kim, when I'm talking about making documentation in the file, if you're having a formal discussion with an employee, you should have that draw up a statement of what happened at the meeting. And if you're officially reprimanding an employee, I will say it's a really good idea to have a witness in the room. If you're going to put somebody on work performance improvement plan, have the board chair there or someone from the board there. When you terminate somebody, definitely have someone else in the room. Now, when you write up the documentation about what happened, the expectation is you'll sign it and they'll sign it. Sometimes you get into a situation where they say, I'm not going to sign that. And you say, fine, that's nice. Thank you. They don't have to sign it for it to actually be a fact. Observations that you use to base your information on can be something as simple as a memorandum for file. That's just kind of an official note you wrote yourself, date it, put the time down, say, I observed X on this date. This employee arrived at work on, we don't have a time clock, you know, memorandum for file. So-and-so showed up for work today at 9:50, was due here at 8. You know, you might build those up, and after 2 of those, you may have a discussion. I probably would have a discussion sooner, but you can have personal documentation that feeds into the formal documentation. But just know that if you write it down, it's discoverable. So, yes, and you do need to keep track, and you need to then put them on a performance improvement plan. And if they can't handle showing up to work when you need them there, you have to weigh their value as an employee is nil. And you really have to be. Kim said that she yelled at her. Well, I bet she did. You can't yell back. It's tempting, but you can't yell back. But thank them for their input and still tell them that, you know, they're terminated. Remember, Kansas is at will. You don't really have to demonstrate that you tried and you tried and you tried and you tried and it just didn't work. Because it may be a situation where for the good of the organization, they only get to do it one time. There may be something so egregious that was it. And that's your determination. And remember, you terminate. The board doesn't terminate. The board terminates you as the director, but you terminate staff. You may ask for a witness to be there, but it's your responsibility to do. I see Galen said, I know that scenario. Huh, okay. She yelled at me, is that what you're talking about, Galen? Yeah, I don't know. People are not happy when they've taken a situation and drag it out as long as they can, and you're finally at that point where you're going to do something, then they realize, yeah, they kind of went 2 steps too far, and it's really, really hard to back up. People do get defensive. They really do. It's difficult to know how to put somebody on a work plan. And I'm going to go back and say, you really have to look at the good of the organization, because, ooh, had one terminate herself when she got arrested. Yes, that'll do it. That was handy. I guess. I know it's hard to separate personal likes for the individual from the organizational well-being, but as the director, you have to step back. So, does anyone have any other questions? I will get into more of the things about how you do work comp. And if you have any specific things you'd really like me to talk about in detail on February 11th, send me those topics. I wanted to do the flyover version here and not get into, if I know what you want to do, I can have samples of how you put somebody on a work performance plan, scenarios for termination, different, what is the unemployment and what are your requirements. I can give you the statutory basis for work comp, any of that sort of stuff. I'd be glad to talk about different things in more detail at a later time.
All right. Well, we're going to be posting this. I'm going to create a YouTube channel, and it's going to be one of those things that you can find with the link. We'll be sending out information about how to get the copy of this recording if you guys want it. Like Laura said, send her the questions for next time, which is February.
It's February 11th, isn't it?
That sounds right.
Okay, I have one last over to leave you with. I love this statement. Anyway, just remember that we don't throw away our core. And from a personnel standpoint, you really need to look at what can I do to find good people, train good people, and keep good people. And if you do that, then you're providing that public good for your community. That's all I have.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was telling Kim we can work on getting you a camera, but it's a security camera.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk more later.
All right. Thank you.
Topics for more HR sorts of things.